happened. I just moved back to Tennessee to save money and had picked up a part-time job at this antique shop off Route 31, a little ways outside of a town called Darrow's Hollow. The store was called Hollow House Antiques. It used to be part of an old company building back when coal mining was the town's only reason to exist. By the time I started, the town had dried up to maybe 400 people, less if you counted just the ones still actively living there and not clinging to memory. The owner, Mr. Clell, was in his 60s, but spry in that wiry way old men in small towns tend to be. He basically gave me the keys and let me run the place while he handled the business side. My days were slow and quiet, open up at 9, sweep the dust off the floor, and kill time behind the counter while old country songs hummed faintly through a warped radio. On a busy day, 2 people might wander in from the next town over, looking for authentic mountain charm. Usually they'd leave with a butter churn or some rusted kitchen scale that made them feel connected to something old and simple. The store had a strange rhythm to it. Most of the stock came from local estates or people clearing out barns. We had a mix of cast iron cookware, faded photos, handmade tools, dented signs, things with history. Some of it felt real, grounded. Other pieces felt off, like they didn't belong, not just to the store, but to this part of the world. I learned not to think about it too hard. One morning, late in October, I came in and found a mess near the back wall. One of the older shelves had collapsed. Looked like it had just given up and splintered overnight. A pile of tools and chains had tumbled to the floor in a mess of rust and cobwebs. It wasn't anything I hadn't dealt with before. Those old beams had a lifespan, and we were always pushing it. But as I started cleaning it up, I found something I didn't recognize. It was a wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, but heavier. It was painted a burnt deep red, so faded it looked like it had been scorched into the wood. Strange markings were carved all around it, not symbols I recognized, but not completely abstract either. They felt too precise to be random, like someone had meant something by them. I didn't see a price tag, no label, nothing in the logbook about it. I asked Mr. Clell that afternoon if he knew where it came from. He just shrugged and said someone probably dropped it off without notice. Could be from that attic Miss Harlan cleared out last week, he muttered. You know how people are. Just leave it on the counter, so I did. I figured maybe someone would come in and claim it or give us a price. The lid had no hinges, no visible seam, but I assumed it opened from the top. Except it didn't. I pulled, twisted, tried wedging a screwdriver into the side. Nothing. Not even a wiggle. I even brought a hairdryer from the back and tried heating the wood in case it had swelled shut from moisture. Still nothing. That would have been strange enough, but I started noticing something else. Every time I walked past it, the carvings seemed off. Not completely different, just angled weird, like the light was hitting them in a new way. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The mind plays tricks. But I started going out of my way to walk around it. And that's when I realized it was always facing me. No matter what side I passed, it looked like it had turned itself, just slightly, to follow my movement. 2 days later, I came in and found the back door wide open, no sign of a break-in. Nothing missing that I could see, except for the box. In its place on the counter was a neat little square of dust, gray, fine as powdered stone, not like anything I'd seen in the shop before. That night, I didn't drive home. My place was up a narrow mountain road surrounded by trees, and something about the whole day had just rubbed me wrong. Instead, I stayed at the Cliffside, a small inn off Main Street. It used to be a boarding house, with creaky wood floors and heavy doors. The rooms were simple but clean, and the owners, Sarah and Tom, knew me well enough to hand over a spare key without asking questions. I was dead asleep when I woke up to a sound I couldn't place. Not loud, just strange. It wasn't footsteps, more like dragging. A soft, scraping movement, like something heavy being pulled slowly across the wood floor. It was coming from inside the room. I sat up, heart hammering. Switched on the bedside lamp. The room was exactly as I left it, chair by the window, coat on the hook. Nothing out of place. But the sound had felt real. Like I'd heard it with my whole body, not just my ears. I got up. Checked under the bed, opened the closet. Nothing. I didn't sleep much after that. The following night, the sound came back, but this time it followed me home. I was brushing my teeth when I heard it, scraping. A slow push across the floorboards. Except it was coming from beneath me. My house sat on a raised foundation with a crawl space underneath. That night, the sound came from right below the living room. I stood still, toothbrush in hand, heart suddenly racing. It went on for maybe a minute back and forth like something pacing. Then, silence. I went outside with a flashlight, crouched down, opened the crawl space panel. Nothing. No raccoons, no tracks, no smell, just dead leaves and dust. After that, things started shifting in my house. Subtle stuff, but enough to notice. My phone charger coiled neatly in the bathroom sink, a spoon resting on the edge of the couch. My belt, again, laid in a perfect circle by the front door, and always the dust. Little patches of that same fine gray powder, sometimes by the back door, other times in the hallway. Once, I found a thin trail of it leading from the guest room closet to nowhere. I vacuumed, scrubbed, called Joel again to check for leaks or insulation issues. He didn't find anything. I went back to the store and flipped through the logbook, hoping to find something, anything about the box. Toward the very back, scribbled in faint pencil, I found 3 lines written in shaky handwriting. The box is not locked. That last line stuck with me. I didn't know what it meant, but something about it clicked in the worst way. I started noticing corners in my house that felt off. The hallway to the bedroom felt longer one night. Another night, I swear the kitchen window was smaller than usual. Then came the door. I woke up to pee around 3 a.m., walked out into the hallway, and there it was. A new door. No knob. No frame. Just a blank rectangle flush with the wall, like it had been painted on but was somehow real. I stood in front of it for a long time. Didn't touch it. Didn't move. Eventually, I went back to bed and stared at the ceiling until sunrise. In the morning, it was gone. Except for the dust. Same spot. The last night I spent in that house, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I lock that door every night. I live alone. I turned over and saw someone standing there. They didn't move. Just stood in the doorway. Too tall. Shoulders almost touching the top of the frame. No features. Just a silhouette. I opened my mouth, tried to speak, but nothing came out. Then the figure stepped back into the hallway, and I saw it, the extra door. Back again. This time, slightly open. I don't know what made me do it, but I jumped out of bed and slammed it shut with both hands. The scraping stopped instantly. Everything went still. That humming tension I hadn't even realized I'd been feeling just disappeared. I moved 2 weeks later, rented a place in the valley near Corbin's Hollow, closer to people, closer to noise. I never went back to the store. Mr. Clell left me a voicemail asking if I wanted to pick up my final paycheck, but I refused to go. Even now, I don't know what the box was. Mom had just finalized her divorce from Barry, my stepdad, and decided it was time for a reset. She didn't ask my opinion. She just came home from her last shift at the diner, dropped the keys on the counter and said, "We're leaving." Next thing I knew, we were packed into her clunky old Subaru, with everything we owned crammed into garbage bags and plastic tubs. We drove for nearly 8 hours, leaving behind our apartment in Lexington, Kentucky, and landing somewhere in the Appalachian part of West Virginia, in a town so small it didn't even show up on the GPS until we were practically on top of it, Moss Glen. I don't know what she expected, but I don't think either of us were ready for what we found. She said we were moving into a house she'd inherited from her uncle, someone I had literally never heard her mention in my entire life. Apparently, it came out of nowhere. A letter, a deed, and a scribbled signature. She thought it was some kind of gift from the universe. A chance, she kept saying. Something's finally going our way. It was not a gift. The house was this drooping 2-story thing with a slanted roof and siding the color of old teeth. It looked like it was trying to fold into the hillside. The porch steps were soft under our feet, like walking on stacked wet towels. Weeds as tall as my waist had taken over the yard. Behind it was a thin little creek that barely moved unless it rained. Then it turned into this sluggish brown sludge that stank like wet leaves and rotting pennies. The house had been empty for a long time. That much was obvious. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and that old paper dust smell you get in abandoned places. The wallpaper was curling at the edges. Floorboards groaned even when no one was moving. There were cobwebs so high up in the corners I had to wonder how anything even got up there. And under the stairs, tucked behind the coat closet, there was this narrow, locked door. My mom tugged at it, first with her hands, then with a crowbar, but it didn't move, not even a splinter. She gave up eventually, muttering something about structural weirdness in old buildings. She told me not to worry about it. She said that a lot in those first couple weeks. My room was upstairs, right at the top of the stairs, and it was, fine, at first, small. The window faced the woods. The radiator clanked constantly even though we hadn't turned it on. And every night when I laid down, I could hear the floors creaking. Not randomly, though. It wasn't just the wind or settling boards. It was a pattern, like slow footsteps circling the bed, once, twice, then stopping at the foot of it. I thought maybe it was mice, or just the house adjusting to us. I kept telling myself that until the night I heard the click of the doorknob turning. I always locked my door. Every night. It was a habit even back in Kentucky. I even started jamming a chair under the knob just to be safe. But by morning, every single time the chair would be moved, just slightly. Just enough so that the door could open if someone wanted to. Then Mom started doing weird things. I found her standing barefoot in the backyard one night around 3 a.m, just staring out at the creek. She didn't react when I called her name. I had to physically guide her inside. She didn't remember it the next day. That became a pattern. Every few nights, I'd wake up and find her outside, always in the same spot, always staring at the same patch of water, like it was whispering something. Then came the night I caught her crouched by the locked door with a steak knife, trying to wedge it open. She didn't even look at me when I called her name. Just stood up, went back to bed, and acted like it didn't happen. By the 3rd month, I gave up on my bedroom. I started sleeping on the couch downstairs with the lights on. It felt safer somehow. I set my phone to record audio while I slept, not because I wanted to catch something, but because I needed to know I wasn't losing my mind. I listened to the first full night of audio exactly once. Around 4 hours in, the static picked up. It wasn't loud, just a faint crackle, like when a signal's cutting out. Then, behind it, a whisper, garbled, croaking, like it had been pulled through a drain and spit back out. It said, "She belongs here now." I deleted the file right away. I didn't want it in my phone. I didn't want it in the world. The town didn't help. People were polite on the surface, but always just a little too quiet, like they were holding something back. I stopped by one of the churches to ask if they knew anything about the house's history, and the pastor, this wiry man in his 50s, looked me right in the eye and said, "You're better off leaving before the ground learns your name." That's exactly how he said it. I asked what he meant, and he just repeated it, slower, before closing the door in my face. The worst part, we found bones. After a heavy rain, the creek flooded a bit. When it receded, I spotted something tangled in the mud near the bank. It looked like animal remains at first. Then I saw the jaw, the gold tooth. I froze. My mom came out, looked at it, and without a word made me help her bury it. She told me not to talk about it again. Not to her, not to anyone. I tried calling my stepdad, hoping maybe he'd come get me. He didn't answer. I don't know if he was screening calls or something else was going on, but after a while I gave up. I begged my mom to leave, but she just shook her head and said, "It's not done with me yet." That line stuck with me more than I wanted it to. Then the power went out. It was during a thunderstorm, loud, close lightning, wind slamming against the side of the house. I was curled on the couch under a blanket, flashlight pointed at the ceiling, just waiting for it to pass. And then I heard it. A dragging noise upstairs. Not footsteps heavier, like someone pulling something across the floor. I held my breath. Then came the click. The door under the stairs. I didn't go check it. I didn't need to. I grabbed my shoes, shoved them on without tying the laces, and ran out the back door into the rain. I slipped down the muddy slope behind the house, landed hard, and just stayed there until the sun came up. When I finally crept back inside, soaking and shivering, the door under the stairs was closed, perfectly shut, like it had never moved. But things changed after that. The smell in the house shifted. It stopped smelling like mildew and started smelling like wet leather and copper. My mom's speech got scrambled. She'd mutter weird things under her breath, phrases that didn't make sense. Don't turn your back on the mirror too long. It won't stop if you keep naming it. You can't name something you buried before it had a face. I started researching. I found the town's little library, really just a converted storage room behind the town hall, and flipped through their only binder of property records. My mom's uncle, the one who supposedly left her the house, he'd been declared dead 5 years before the deed was signed over to her. Same name, same address, but no funeral, no obituary, just one note next to his name, unclaimed. That night, I confronted her. She blinked at me like I was speaking another language. Then she said, calm as anything, I don't think I ever had an uncle. Around 3 a.m., I woke to humming. It was faint but close, the kind of sound you hear more in your chest than your ears. I got up, and there she was. My mom, hunched in front of the crawl space under the stairs. The door was wide open. That was it. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't even grab my phone charger. I ran out the front door, hit the highway, and kept walking until a trucker picked me up and took me to a gas station a few towns over. I called a friend from school, Emma, and she wired me just enough for a bus back to Kentucky. About 6 months later, I saw the house listed online. Same photos, same porch, but now it said, family owned for generations, recently renovated, previously used for historical storage, must remain under local preservation trust. I'd taken a maintenance job in a little place called Wexler Ridge, tucked up in the hills of eastern Kentucky. Maybe 200 people lived there, though I never saw more than 10 at a time unless there was a funeral. They let me live in this single wide trailer parked just behind the volunteer fire station. That was part of the deal. Free place to stay as long as I looked after the building. That meant keeping the generator fueled, replacing the air filters every couple months, flushing the water lines if they sat too long. Basic stuff. Wasn't bad. Quiet out there, no neighbors unless you counted raccoons, and most nights I didn't see another soul. And honestly, that suited me fine. I'd had my fill of cities, noise, and people who couldn't mind their business. Out in Wexler Ridge, the air felt still. Time moved slower. Some days it barely felt like it moved at all. Then the padlock showed up. It was early, maybe 6:30 in the morning. I'd gone around back to check the utility room, same as always, and there it was. A heavy, rusted padlock looped through the latch on the outside of the door, which didn't make sense. That door didn't have a hasp, just a bolt from the inside. No way to lock it like that unless someone had put the hardware in themselves. I stared at it for a while. Not because I was scared, just confused. The latch wasn't new. It had been there a while, blended in with the weathered siding like it belonged, but I knew it hadn't been there the day before. I cut it off and tossed the lock in the trash barrel near the fence. Didn't think much of it. Figured someone was playing a weird joke, or maybe there was some old protocol from before my time. The next morning, it was back. Same exact lock. Same rust pattern. Same scuffed edges on the shank. This time, I walked it down to the creek and dropped it in. Didn't tell anyone. Day after that, it returned again, but now the door was wound shut with baling wire. Like someone had tried to make sure it couldn't be opened, not even by force. I stared at it longer that time. I didn't like how careful the knots were. Like whoever did it took their time. Like they weren't in a rush at all. Still, I kept it to myself. A couple weeks later, Judith, she ran the general store, called me up, asked if I could check out the old tool shed behind the church. Said it looked off. That was the word she used. Off. Wouldn't say more than that. I grabbed a flashlight and met her there that afternoon. The shed was leaning hard to one side, like it was ready to give up entirely. Roof sagging, door swollen from rain. She stayed back as I tried to force it open. Wood splintered. It took a good shove with my shoulder to pop it loose. Inside, it was completely dark. Not just dim dark, the kind of pitch that eats the beam of your flashlight. The air smelled like damp wood and iron. Not blood exactly, but something old and metallic, like rust, mixed with wet dirt. I took a few steps in and immediately noticed the floor had buckled near the center. Boards snapped under one boot. Wouldn't have been safe to go much further. Then I saw the carvings. On the back wall, maybe 6 inches from the floor, were 7 notches. Carved deep, each one identical. Same height, same width. Same width, lined up like tally marks, but too clean, too deliberate. Near them sat a small ceramic bowl. Old, cracked. Looked like something left out for a stray cat, only it had these dried scraps inside. Meat, maybe. Whatever it was, it didn't smell anymore. Just looked forgotten. I turned to tell Judith, but she was already walking away. Didn't say a word. Just called over her shoulder, lock it again, and kept going. A few days later, I tried to bring it up at the store. She didn't look at me, just slid a brown paper bag across the counter and said, "If it knocks, you don't open." That's it. No explanation. Inside were 3 raw potatoes. That night, I left the bag on the trailer step. Felt stupid doing it. But something in the way she'd looked, flat, resigned, made me think twice about ignoring it. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the knock. Not on the door. Low, under the bedroom window. 3 knocks. Soft. Hollow. Then, after a pause, a 4th. My mouth went dry. I stayed frozen under the blanket, watching the window like it might breathe. Didn't dare speak or move. Eventually, the knocking stopped. In the morning, the bag was gone. The dirt outside was disturbed, like something had dragged along the wall just below the siding. Narrow, straight, like a heavy branch had been pulled across it. I didn't talk about it. Then the lights started acting up. One by one, they'd go out, never all at once. First the kitchen, then the little overhead in the engine bay. I'd replace them, only for a different one to burn out the next day. It wasn't faulty wiring. I checked all that when I moved in. The timing was just too deliberate. One night I heard Ray, the older guy who worked the station sometimes, muttering in the garage. When I got closer, I realized he wasn't talking. He was whispering. Just one word, over and over, return. I said his name and he jumped like I'd slapped him, eyes wide, like he didn't know where he was. Swore he hadn't said a word. 2 days later, the storm rolled in. It poured for 3 days straight. Trees down, roads flooded. The power kept flickering, no signal. I was stuck inside the trailer with a book and a flashlight, just waiting it out. On the second night, I heard something walk across the roof. Not fast, not heavy. Just slow, steady footsteps, from one end to the other. Then silence. A few minutes later, I heard the window screen near my bed peel upward. Not snap. Peel, like fingers pressing under it. I shined the flashlight out there. Nothing. But the screen was bent, torn just a little along the edge. I got up and nailed it shut. Third night, the fire alarm went off inside the station, sharp, piercing, no heat, no smoke, just noise. When I opened the garage, the passenger door on the engine was wide open, cab light on. Something had been inside. The floor mat had muddy prints. Not human. Too long. Too many toes. Like a child's foot, but stretched and narrow with deep heel marks. Ray showed up later, pale as a ghost. Said we had to finish the circle. I asked him what that meant. He pointed out behind the shed to a flat patch of dirt I'd never noticed before. 3 wooden posts stood in the center, surrounded by a loose scatter of stones. Said it had to be rebuilt every few years. That if it wasn't, things got curious. He didn't explain more. Just handed me a shovel and said, "Tonight." We didn't talk much while we worked, just dug. Stacked the stones, planted the posts. Then he took out a knife, cut his palm, and let the blood fall into the dirt. He looked at me and waited. I didn't move. After a while, he just nodded and said, "You are safe now." After that, I left the next morning. I was 21 when it happened. I had just moved back in with my mom after dropping out of college. We were living in this little town in southern West Virginia. It was October. Cool, damp, and quiet. I'd picked up a part-time job with a local land surveyor to make some money and get out of the house. Most days it meant hiking around with a map and spray paint, flagging trees and checking coordinates. Easy work, mostly just me in the woods. That day, I was out near a place everyone still calls Diller's Hollow. Not its official name anymore, but nobody really uses the updated one. Locals stick to what they know. My boss, Ray, was supposed to meet me around noon at the ridge access point with the truck, but I'd gone up ahead to finish marking a property line we'd been working on the week before. There'd been some weird argument between landowners that paused the job. You can't drive all the way up there. Trail gets too rough, too narrow. Big roots, steep incline, that kind of thing. So you park and hike the last mile. I didn't mind. I had my gear, a thermos of coffee, and one of those laminated parcel maps clipped to my pack. It was a quiet job. Nobody ever really messed with me up there, but that day someone did. About half an hour in, I saw something up ahead that didn't sit right. Thought maybe it was a tarp or a busted old hunting blind, not uncommon out there. But as I got closer, I realized it was a guy, just sitting on a low rock off to the side of the trail. He was wearing this old wool coat, really formal looking, and one of those stiff-brimmed hats that make you think of black and white war photos. His boots were clean, spotless actually. Like, no mud, no scuffs. Same with his pants. Not a leaf stuck to him. It was weird, especially considering how damp everything had been lately. He turned his head when I got within maybe 30 feet. Didn't say anything, just watched. I slowed down, gave him a nod, kept walking. Figured he might be one of those off-the-grid types. They pop up now and then. Folks who live in cabins without power keep to themselves. But then, just as I passed, he stood up and said, "You dropped your paper." I stopped. My map was clipped in tight. I turned around and he was holding something out, but it wasn't my map. It looked like an old flyer, kind of sun-bleached and wrinkled from water. The writing on top was red, but I couldn't make out what it said. He wasn't walking toward me, just stood there, arm out, like he expected me to come get it. I told him it wasn't mine. He said, "She walked right through here, just like you." Then she went quiet. That made me pause. I asked if he meant someone got lost out here or if he needed help, but he didn't answer. He just turned and walked straight into the woods behind him, not down the trail, just off into the trees. And he didn't make a sound. No crunch of leaves, no brush moving. Nothing. It was like he melted into the forest. I stood there, trying to listen for footsteps, branches, anything, but it was silent, just wind up in the trees. After a minute or two, I kept going, tried to shake it off. Probably just some strange guy camping rough. But when I passed where he'd been sitting, the rock wasn't there. No boulder. Just some scattered leaves and a couple small stones. Nothing big enough to sit on. I looked for footprints but didn't see any. That bugged me. The trail was muddy from the rain earlier that week, and my own tracks were clear as day behind me. I tried to radio Ray, but I couldn't get a signal. Happens sometimes up on the ridge. I kept walking. About 10 minutes later, I reached the northern boundary marker. That's when I noticed something else. One of the trees we'd flagged earlier didn't have our tape on it anymore. Instead, someone had tied this thick piece of red yarn around the trunk. It wasn't just a piece of string, it was braided, almost like a bracelet, and dangling from it was a Polaroid inside a plastic sandwich bag, tied shut with fishing line. I opened the bag. The photo was faded, all washed out, but I could barely make out a woman standing in front of what looked like a ridge, maybe even this one. Someone had scratched the word "look" into the plastic with something sharp. I didn't like it. Left it there and kept walking. Took a few photos of the marker with my work phone, but the whole thing had started to feel off. Then I heard the voice again. It was him. the man with the coat and the hat. This time I couldn't see him, but he was off the trail to my left, deeper in the trees. He was talking slow, like he was explaining something to someone standing next to him. She's not listening. She's still walking. I froze. My mouth went dry. Then silence. No birds, no bugs, nothing. Just that distant sound of leaves moving way above me, like the trees were breathing slow. I sped up. I wasn't bothering with flagging anymore. I just wanted out. I kept walking hard for what felt like 5, maybe 10 minutes. Then I ended up right back at that same tree. The red yarn. The Polaroid. Same spot. That trail doesn't loop. I hadn't turned. I'd followed the GPS on my handheld, just like I always do. It said I was moving forward. And yet, somehow, I'd gone in a full circle. I tried Ray again. Still nothing. So I did something I usually wouldn't. I pulled out my knife, cut down the yarn and the Polaroid, stuffed them in my pack, and turned around, this time watching for my own footprints, following them back. I told myself maybe some local was messing with me, playing tricks. But deep down I knew that wasn't it. About halfway back down, the trail dipped around this bend. And there he was again. Same man. Same man. Same coat. This time he was standing right in the center of the path, holding the paper higher up, arms stretched out toward me. I finally saw it clearly. It wasn't a flyer. It was a missing person poster. Old, yellowed around the edges, with a photo of a girl in a red jacket. The name was too smudged to read, but the date was still clear. Disappeared October 1981. Then he just dropped it and stepped backward into the brush. Didn't push branches aside, didn't crunch leaves, just faded into the trees like smoke. I ran. I didn't care about mud or gear or anything else. I ran until I saw Ray's truck sitting at the gravel pull-off. He must have seen the look on my face because he jumped out as soon as I came into view. I told him someone had been following me, that I got turned around. I didn't tell him everything. Not then. We drove straight into town. I gave the yarn and the photo to the sheriff's office. They took it seriously, at least for a little while, sent someone out to check, but they didn't find anything. No red yarn, no Polaroid, no footprints or sign that anyone had been out there. My cousin Lane had taken this welding job out in Durham for a couple of months, and before he left, he asked if I could house sit for him. His trailer was way out past Dry Fork on a gravel road where the trees grow in so thick you almost feel like you're being swallowed up as you drive in. The kind of place where you lose phone signal about 5 minutes before you even pull up the drive. The closest neighbor was an old church across the road, sagging inward like it was trying to collapse quietly. Besides that, there were 2 houses a little farther up, both dark, both looking like no one's been home in years. I remember thinking when I first parked out front, well, if I scream, no one's going to hear it but raccoons. Lane's place was small, a little single wide that leaned a bit to one side. 2 bedrooms, barely enough space in the kitchen to turn around, and a back porch that looked out over the woods. He'd lived there for almost a year, but I'd never visited before. He mostly came into town on weekends, and we'd catch up over drinks. The first couple of weeks were uneventful. I fed his dog, a sleepy old lab named Duke, checked the mail, flipped a few lights on in the evening so it looked lived in. Drove into Junction once a week for groceries and to refill on gas. It was quiet, yeah, but peaceful. Then one morning, I got up and saw the front door was wide open. Nothing broken. No marks on the frame, no scratches on the lock. Duke was curled up in the kitchen like nothing had happened. I stood there for a minute staring at the door, half expecting to hear footsteps out in the trees. Nothing. I closed it, locked it, and told myself maybe I'd just forgotten the night before, even though I clearly remembered turning the deadbolt. It was easy enough to brush off, but I was more careful that night. Made a point of double-checking everything before bed. Locked the door. Turned off the porch light. Checked the windows. The next evening, I came home from work and walked into the kitchen to find every single drawer pulled out. Not ransacked or messy, just open, like someone had gone through them one by one. The utensils were still there. The change jar was still full. Nothing missing, just examined. I called Lane that night. "Hey man," I said, trying not to sound spooked. "Just checking, does anyone else have a key to the place?" He paused. "No, just you." "Why?" I told him what I saw, tried to make it sound casual. He laughed, said, "Maybe I was sleepwalking. I wasn't." 2 days later, it happened again, only this time the cabinet doors were all open too. Duke met me at the door barking like crazy, pacing in front of the hallway, fur standing up along his back. I tried to call him over, but he wouldn't leave the spot. Just kept staring down that dark hallway, letting out this low, steady growl like something was back there. That night, he wouldn't even go into the bedroom. Just curled up tight on the living room rug and stayed there all night. It's hard to explain how it got under my skin. It wasn't dramatic, nothing thrown, no loud noises, just these little shifts. Quiet things. I'd wake up and the microwave clock would be flashing some strange time, 3:31, 10:58. Not the usual 12:00 you get after a power outage, and the rest of the power would be fine. Lights on, fridge humming, nothing else reset. I started noticing doors that I knew I'd closed the night before standing open in the morning. The dog's leash disappeared off the hook by the front door and turned up 3 days later under the bathroom sink. I don't even go into that bathroom if I don't have to. Eventually, I stopped sleeping in the bedroom. I'd crash on the couch with the TV on, volume low, just to break the silence. The quiet at night felt like it had weight to it, like something pressing down on your chest. One night, I sneezed, and I swear to God, from the hallway, clear as anything, I heard someone say, "Bless you." I froze. Didn't move for probably a full minute. The TV was on mute. I'd hit it with the remote by accident earlier. It wasn't the dog. He was asleep on my feet. But that voice was calm, polite even. Just there. After that, I started leaving the porch light on all night. A few days later, I was out on the back porch just watching the trees sway, trying to relax. I glanced down the gravel road, and there was someone standing right at the bend where the road disappears into the woods. Too far to see their face, but I could tell they were looking at the trailer. They didn't move. Just stood there. I went inside, shut the door, and peeked through the blinds. They were still there, didn't budge. I watched them for what felt like half an hour before they finally turned and walked into the trees. That night, Duke went nuts barking at the back door. I opened it and found this little ring of rocks, maybe 2 feet wide, stacked in a perfect circle on the porch boards. It looked intentional, like something ceremonial almost. I knocked it apart with my boot, swept the pieces off the edge of the porch, and shut the door. Next morning, the rocks were back. Same spot. Same circle. After that, I started sleeping in my truck some nights, parked under the trees with Duke in the passenger seat. It wasn't comfortable, but I didn't care. Being inside that trailer started to feel like being watched. Not constantly, but off and on. Like something would forget about me, then suddenly remember. One night I was up late watching one of Lane's old VHS tapes he had stashed in a box. Around 3 in the morning, I paused it to grab a drink. When I came back, the screen had changed. It was still paused, but on a different frame. Earlier in the movie, I hit play. It rolled backward for a second, then stopped. Then boom. Everything shut off. Power gone. No flicker, no warning, just darkness. Duke started howling, not barking, howling, like he was grieving something. The next morning, I drove into town and stopped by the feed store, made small talk with the guy behind the counter. I mentioned where I was staying, just casually. He looked up real slow and said, "Out past Bessie Hollow?" "Yeah," I said. He nodded, like that explained everything. "You see anything strange out there?" he said. "Don't answer it. Don't talk to it. Don't let it know you see it." I asked him what that meant. He said, "Some things don't want to be seen, and they remember if you do." That was enough for me. I went back to the trailer, packed up a few essentials, and drove out to my Uncle Rick's place, an hour away. Didn't even tell Lane at first, just left him a voicemail. When I finally talked to him, I told him I wasn't staying another night. He didn't argue, said he understood. I locked the door, got in my truck, and left. The house I moved into had been sitting empty for a while. My uncle's old place out in Briar Hollow, which is barely a town really. The house itself sat on the edge of a hollow, tucked up against the woods like it had been dropped there and forgotten. One story, cedar siding that had gone silvery gray with age, and a front porch that slumped just enough to make you feel like it had given up on being level a long time ago. It didn't look haunted or anything, just worn out. Tired. I'd only planned to be there a few weeks. Just long enough to clean it out and get it listed. My uncle hadn't lived in it full-time for years before he passed. He mostly used it for storage. A couple busted recliners, some taxidermy he hadn't hung, boxes of records and tools that were mostly rust. Nothing valuable, but not quite trash either. But then a few days turned into a week, and then 2. I didn't mean to stay, it just sort of happened. I'd get up in the morning, fix something loose drawer, sagging cabinet, porch step that creaked more than the rest. I'd make a pot of coffee on the old electric range, flip through the local paper someone always tossed under the gravel, and before I knew it, it'd be evening. I slept in the front bedroom, the one with a view of the yard and the road. It felt safer somehow, being able to see both directions. There were 3 bedrooms in the house. The middle one I used to stack the boxes I hadn't gone through yet. The back one? I didn't go in there. The door was always a little stuck, like the frame had swollen around it. And even when I did manage to get it open the first day, there was this damp, earthy smell in there that didn't make sense, like wet bark. Even with the windows open, it just clung to the air. I figured maybe something had gotten into the insulation, or there was a leak I hadn't found. Either way, I just avoided it. About a week in, I was out back splitting logs with this old axe I found in the shed when I noticed a kid standing at the edge of the woods. He didn't say anything, just stood there with his arms at his sides, staring like he'd been waiting. Couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Pale, dark hair. Wearing a coat too thin for the weather. I called out to him, asked if he was okay. He didn't answer right away, just kept staring. Eventually he pointed down the ridge behind the trees and said, "I live that way." His voice was soft, flat. No lilt or emotion. When I asked his name, he said, "Levi." Then nothing else. There was something off about the way he talked. Not shy exactly. More like he was repeating something he practiced. After a few seconds he turned and walked back into the woods without another word. That night, I left the motion light on behind the house. Around 2 in the morning, it clicked on. I sat up in bed and looked out the window, expecting a raccoon or maybe a possum nosing around the garbage cans. Nothing, just still trees. Next morning, I found boot prints in the frost around the woodpile. Small ones, too small to be mine. They circled the stump where I'd been splitting logs, like someone had been standing there, maybe watching. Didn't see Levi again for a few more days. I'd sort of convinced myself it was a weird moment. A lost kid, maybe a neighbor's grandson visiting. Then one morning I was heading to the mailbox and there he was again, standing halfway behind a tree like he'd been waiting for me to walk past. He didn't wave. Just stepped out and said, "Did you go in the back bedroom yet?" I told him no, I hadn't. He nodded like that made perfect sense. Then he looked past me, toward the house and said, "Do you hear them at night?" I asked. "Who?" He just shrugged and said, "You will." I didn't sleep great that night. Every house has its noises, especially older ones. The furnace would kick on with a deep, rattling groan, and the hallway creaked when the air shifted. Normal stuff. But around 3, I heard something I couldn't pin down. It sounded like weight, someone or something slowly stepping on the floorboards just outside the bedroom. Not fast, not in a straight line. Just one slow board at a time, pausing between each one. Like it was listening to me breathe. Then it stopped. I slept on the couch the next night with the hallway light on. Felt stupid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been walking. 3 mornings later, I found the door to the back bedroom wide open. I hadn't touched it. The smell was worse. Wet wood, mold, something faintly sweet and rotting. I stood there for a long time before finally stepping inside. The room was empty except for a single old rocking chair, turned to face the window. The floor was dusty, undisturbed, but the cushion had a dent in it, like someone had just gotten up. That night, I dreamed about the girl. She was standing at the foot of my bed, hair dripping wet, strands clinging to her cheeks, but the floor beneath her feet was dry. She didn't say anything, didn't move, just stared at me like I was supposed to know something. I woke up drenched in sweat, throat dry. The door was open again, didn't hear it move. I walked down to the gas station around noon and asked the guy at the counter if he knew a kid named Levi. He looked up from his crossword, then frowned. Levi, he said like it didn't quite register. Little guy. Black hair. Said he lives down the ridge. The guy shook his head slowly. Ain't been any kids out that way in years, he said. You sure you saw him? I didn't have a good answer for that. After that, I stopped answering the door after dark. I'd hear knocks sometimes. Never loud, just one knock. Wait a few seconds. Then another. Like whoever was out there was patient. I stood in the hallway one night holding a hammer, staring at the door while the knocks kept coming. Then, finally, silence. In the morning, I found more boot prints. Small again, coming from the woods, stopping at the porch, then heading back the way they came. A few days later, I found something on the porch. A little wooden figure, maybe 4 inches tall. Looked hand-carved. No face, just a smooth head and a lump of a body. Like something a kid might whittle during a boring afternoon. I tossed it into the fire pit and lit it with kindling. Within 10 minutes, I felt dizzy. Not sick, just off. Like I wasn't fully inside my body anymore. That night, I installed a deadbolt on the back bedroom door. I didn't care how it looked. I screwed the metal plate straight into the swollen frame. Just after I lay down, I heard it. A soft rattle, not frantic, just steady, like someone slowly pressing their hand against the door, checking if it would give. By sunrise, I'd already packed my stuff. Clothes, papers, wallet. I didn't take much. I locked up behind me, walked to the edge of the trees where the woods began, and turned around for one last look. The curtain in the back bedroom window moved just slightly. No breeze. Window was shut. Then I saw Levi again. He was standing just where the trees started, hands at his sides. He raised one hand in a slow wave, but he wasn't looking at me. His eyes were on the house. I drove straight through to Asheville and didn't stop until I was well past town limits. Listed the house as is and sold it to some couple from Michigan who wanted to retire in a quiet place. My uncle had this old place tucked way out past Indian Ridge, about 10 miles from the nearest paved road. It wasn't even on most maps, just a little dot off a gravel route that didn't get plowed in the winter and barely held together in the rain. The rest of my mom's family lived closer in, down in spots like Fair Grove and Otterfield, small places you'd miss if you blinked. But his cabin stood on its own, wedged between a dying apple orchard and a patch of clearing littered with rusted-out logging equipment no one had touched in decades. He kept goats, rabbits, and a couple chickens, and his idea of staying connected was a battery-powered radio that picked up 2 a.m. stations on a good day. No phone, no internet. That weekend, my mom had driven down to Corbin to see her sister, and I got dropped off at my uncle's for a couple nights. I didn't mind. He wasn't the talkative type, but I liked being out there. No noise, no neighbors, just a lot of open space and the kind of quiet that made your ears ring after sunset. Plus, he let me shoot soda cans with a .22 and feed the animals, which, for a 12-year-old, felt like grown-up stuff. We spent most of Saturday morning clearing out the remains of a half-collapsed shed behind the chicken coop. Years of old feed bags, broken tools, rotting lumber, it all smelled like mildew and mouse droppings. Every few minutes, something would skitter off into the shadows, and we'd have to pause and wait for it to stop moving. My uncle didn't say much while we worked, just pointed to what needed hauling and grunted occasionally when we uncovered something sharp or halfway alive. Around noon, he dusted off his hands and told me to take a break, said he was going to drive into Mitchell's for diesel about 40 minutes down the ridge and that he'd be back before the sun got too low. The generator had been sputtering the night before, cutting in and out like it couldn't catch its breath. Out there, if you didn't get the generator running before dark, you were stuck with flashlights and whatever the moon decided to give you. So he hopped in the truck, rolled down the windows, and disappeared down the gravel drive, tires crunching the whole way until I couldn't hear them anymore. I wandered over to the goat pen to check the water tubs. It was hot, sticky, still kind of muggy even in the shade, and the goats were lying flat in the dirt, too lazy to even flick their ears at flies. I started rinsing out the big plastic basin with the hose, trying not to splash my shoes, when I noticed movement up by the tree line behind the chicken run. At first, I figured it was someone hiking through. We got the occasional camper or off-trail hiker up that way, even though the trails weren't really marked and half the maps were wrong. A woman came into view first, middle-aged, maybe early 40s, wearing this long powder blue coat that looked completely out of place. It was too hot for sleeves, let alone something that thick. Her hair was tied back, and she walked with this stiff, careful gait like every step was being measured out. Behind her were two kids, small, barefoot, one boy, one girl. They both looked about 5 or 6. Then came a man, then another woman, then more kids, more adults. I counted at least 15 people, maybe more, all walking single file, no talking, no obvious expressions, just moving slowly, steadily like they were following an invisible rope. They were maybe 30 feet from the pen when the woman in the blue coat stopped and turned toward me. The rest of them paused behind her. She called out, soft but clear, and asked if this was the road that led into town. I told her there wasn't a road back here, just the trail behind the ridge that looped around to nowhere. It sort of circled the hill and then dropped into heavy brush. You'd need a machete and a good sense of direction to even attempt it. She nodded like she already knew that, like she'd asked just to see what I'd say. Then she pointed up toward the slope and said, real polite, "Would you walk with us a little ways? We've been traveling a long time. We just want to make sure we're going the right way." I remember how she spoke, almost like reading off a script. Her voice was smooth and even, but the rhythm was just a little off, too deliberate. Every syllable was fully formed, no contractions, no slang, not an accent exactly, just overly careful, like someone pretending to sound normal. I didn't answer right away. Something about the whole thing made my skin feel tight. That's when one of the little kids with her dropped down on all fours and barked. Not playful barking. Not a kid pretending to be a dog. This was deep, guttural, and loud. Too loud for a kid that size. His mouth hung open, and the sound that came out was pure animal. Like a dog on the other side of a chain-link fence, warning you not to come closer. Then the others started to move. 2 or 3 of them crouched down low, almost crawling, their hands curled under them like paws. One of the women behind the man started shaking, just this weird twitch in her arms and shoulders, and made this long, dry hacking noise that sounded like she was choking but never needed to breathe. It was too much. I dropped the hose without turning it off and bolted for the cabin. I slammed the door, flipped the lock, and yanked the old rifle off the hooks above the mantel. I didn't even check if it was loaded. Just crouched under the front window and tried to keep my breathing quiet. For a long time, there was nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no creak of the porch boards. Just the hum of the hose still running and the occasional bleat of a goat somewhere out back. Eventually, I forced myself to peek through the curtains. The yard was empty. No one near the pen, no one on the trail. I waited maybe 10 more minutes before I cracked open the back door and ran, low and fast, through the orchard. Branches slapped against my arms. I didn't care. I just kept running until I hit the neighboring fence line and spotted Garrett, the teenage son of the folks who owned the land next to my uncle's. He was under a tarp, working on a 4-wheeler, shirtless and greasy. I must have looked like a lunatic, because he stood up fast and asked if I was okay. I told him what I'd seen. Not all of it. I didn't even know how to explain half of it, but enough to make him frown and call for his dad. The 3 of us, plus their old yellow lab, walked back up toward the cabin. We checked the trail, the chicken run, the slope behind the trees, even the dry creek bed that ran down behind the orchard. Nothing. No prints. No disturbed brush. The only marks in the dirt were my uncle's tire tracks. We stood there for a while, looking out over the ridge. From that spot, you can see clear across the valley and into the tree lines on the other side. There's no cover for a group that size. No place to vanish into. Just forest and empty sky. When my uncle got back, I told him the whole thing. I expected him to laugh or say I was imagining it, but he didn't. He just looked at me for a long second, then started checking all the doors and windows. That night, he locked every door, bolted the shutters, and didn't say much at dinner. The only thing he told me before we turned in was this: there's things out here you don't follow. If they ask you to go with them, you don't. That stuck with me. I never walked that ridge trail again. Not even in daylight. I was 24 when I moved into my uncle's old trailer. He'd taken a welding job up in Indiana and told me I could stay there for a while. No rent, no questions, just pay the electric and don't wreck the place. That was good enough for me. The trailer sat out on this uneven patch of land about 10 minutes from Briar Hollow, just a 2-lane town tucked into the Appalachians. The trailer itself was one of those faded beige rectangles, sun-bleached and slightly listing. The steps up to the door creaked like they were trying to warn me off, and the fridge inside made this weird humming that shifted pitch whenever the AC kicked on. But it was free, and I was broke. So I moved in with a duffel bag, a coffee maker, and the kind of optimism you only get when you're desperate. People in Briar Hollow keep to themselves, but they sure know how to stare, especially if you're not part of the 5 families that have been buried in that dirt for generations. I wasn't. My dad grew up there, but he left when he was 19 and never looked back. I'd only visited twice as a kid, both times for funerals. I figured I wouldn't be around long enough to matter. Inside the trailer, most of the furniture was still there. Couch with busted springs, a coffee table scarred with cigarette burns, and this narrow hallway that led to a bathroom and 2 bedrooms. Just past the bathroom door, there was this shelf nailed crookedly into the wall above the heater vent. Looked like it had been yanked out of another trailer and slapped there without much thought. The shelf was cluttered with little knickknacks, things that looked like someone had collected them while wandering the woods. Bottle caps rusted thin, broken chips of deer antler, a couple of coins worn down to smooth nubs, feathers bound together with dirty twine. Nothing worth stealing. Probably nothing worth keeping. But there was one thing that stood out. A small wooden figure, maybe 4 inches tall, carved from some dark wood, like walnut or something older. It didn't have a face, just 2 small eye holes and a long, narrow head with notches burned into the surface. Around its shoulders was a faded scrap of blue cloth, tied on with thin black thread. It looked like something between a doll and an idol. I wasn't sure which one made me more uncomfortable. I left it alone, felt like it wasn't mine to touch. Some kind of local superstition, maybe. Or just a weird thing someone's grandma stuck there and forgot about. Either way, I wasn't in a rush to mess with it. The first few nights were quiet. I'd get off my shift at Milson's Grocery around 10:30, drive the 15 minutes back to the trailer, heat up a microwave burrito, and crash. The place smelled a little musty, but I got used to it. That's the thing about smells. You stop noticing them after a while, especially when you're tired and poor. But then little things started to feel off. One morning, I noticed the bathroom light was already on when I woke up. I thought maybe I'd forgotten to turn it off. Happens. A few days later, it was the hallway light. Then the kitchen. Always just one. Always a different one. I wasn't drinking. Wasn't high. I figured maybe I hit the switch without realizing, or maybe the wiring was screwy. It was an old trailer. Then the fridge door was cracked open one morning. Not wide open, just enough that the cold air was seeping out and the milk had gone warm. Another time, I found my phone unplugged and lying on the floor under the table. I remember putting it on the charger the night before, like always. Still small things. Easy to brush off. But the third week, I got up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. Around 2 a.m. I was barefoot, shuffling half asleep down the hallway. When I glanced toward the front door, my boots weren't there. I always left them just inside the threshold. Muddy, worn-down things I wore every day. But now they were gone. I opened the front door, and there they were, sitting neatly side by side on the porch. laces tied, upright, placed like someone had gently set them down and walked away. I checked every lock. Door was still bolted, windows latched. That was the first time I felt genuinely uneasy. I didn't say anything to anyone. Who was I going to tell? The folks at the store barely said hi. I wasn't about to walk up to some old-timer at the gas station and ask, "Hey, you sneak into trailers at night and move people's boots around." So instead, I decided to take the figure off the shelf. I didn't toss it. Didn't even move it far. Just took it down carefully, wrapped it in an old bandana, and put it in the junk drawer in the kitchen. You know the kind, stuffed with receipts, pens that don't work, rubber bands, and menus for places that don't deliver out that far. That night, around 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound. Just one knock. Not on the door. From inside the wall right behind my bed. Sharp, hollow, like knuckles on paneling. I held my breath. Nothing else happened. No second knock. No creak. Just that one sound. I didn't sleep. I turned on every light and stayed up drinking coffee until the sun came up. When I opened the drawer the next morning, the figure was gone. I checked the counters, the shelf, even the trash. Nothing. I tried convincing myself I'd moved it somewhere else and forgotten. But 3 days later, I found it, right in the center of the kitchen table, standing straight up. Same cloth, same notches. Only now, there were 5 tiny pins stuck into its shoulders, evenly spaced. Pressed in, deep. I wanted to believe it was a prank, that some kid was sneaking in. Maybe one of the neighbors I hadn't met. But the door was always locked. And it had rained the night before, mud everywhere, but no prints. No tire tracks. I stayed up 2 nights in a row, watching. Nothing happened, no sounds, no movement. Just that feeling like the air wasn't sitting right. Then the hallway lights started flickering. Not constantly. Just when I walked under it. It would wait until I was right there, then blink off. Leave me in the dark just long enough to catch my breath and blink back on. It didn't feel random. One night it went completely dark for maybe half a second. And in that sliver of time, I saw someone, crouched at the end of the hallway, elbows splayed, head tilted, like he was listening. When the light came back, the hallway was empty. I didn't move. Not for a long time. Just stood there, barely breathing. Then I backed into my bedroom, locked the door, and sat on the floor with my back against it until morning. The next day, I called my dad and said I needed help with the lights. He drove out early the next morning, walked around, checked the breaker, looked at the bulbs, said everything was working fine, but he never stepped inside. Not once. He just stood on the steps and said, "You see that little statue in there? Don't throw it away. Don't mess with it." I didn't say a word. A few nights later, I got home from work and saw the front door standing wide open. The deadbolt was still turned. But the door had been swung open anyway. Nothing was missing. Wallet was there, my phone, even my bottle of whiskey, half gone, untouched. But in the bedroom, every drawer had been pulled out and set carefully on the bed. Everything inside, clothes, books, socks, still folded, still neat, and right in the center of the pillow was the figure. But now, it had more notches carved into the face, a curved row, just enough to resemble a smile. That was it. I packed what I could in under 20 minutes, left the rest, didn't even stay the night. I crashed at a motel off Route 7 until I found a room above the bar in town. It was noisy, overpriced, and smelled like fried grease. But I slept through the night, and that was enough. I've been working a meter reading job for about 8 months, just me, a company truck, and a clipboard full of addresses. Most of the time, I didn't mind it. This route was way out past Winters Cross, up in a spot people mostly forgot about. Lots of faded mailboxes, long dirt driveways, places where the houses either leaned too far to one side or didn't exist anymore at all, just weeds and the ghost of a foundation. That day was a Tuesday. I remember that because Tuesdays were the longest. Buckner Ridge was the last loop on the Sheet 2 properties and, weirdly, an old church listed at the very end. The name stuck with me even before anything strange happened. Something about it sounded like it didn't belong on a power company's billing system. The first house was easy. Looked abandoned. The windows were boarded up, weeds up to the window sills. Meter was right there on the wall, clear as day. The second house, different story. There was this gate made of wire and old fence posts, barely hanging on. A wooden sign was tied to it with string, and someone had painted the words, "No reading after dark," in these thick, uneven strokes. Like they were in a hurry, or angry. I checked my watch, 3:15. Still daylight. I hesitated for maybe half a second, then opened the gate and went around back. The meter was buried under a wall of kudzu. I had to tear at it with both hands, pulling vines back to get even a glimpse of the numbers. While I was doing that, I heard a creak behind me. I looked up. The porch door, old wood, torn screen, had swung open. There was no breeze. Nothing else had moved around me. I remember that clearly. Everything else was still, even the leaves on the trees. I called out a quick hello, just loud enough to carry. No answer, not a sound, not even a shuffle from inside. When I turned back to the meter, the vines I just pulled off had somehow wrapped back over it. Not like they'd fallen, no, they were tight again. Coiled, like they'd never been disturbed. I hadn't even stepped away. That stopped me for a second. I remember blinking hard, half expecting it to be in my head. I peeled the vines away again, finished the reading, and wrote it down. And when I looked up again, someone was standing at the edge of the woods. They weren't close, maybe 20 yards away, but I saw them clearly. A person. No hat, no visible gear, just standing with both arms hanging at their sides facing the house. They didn't move. They didn't wave or call out. Nothing. But something was off. Their posture was wrong. The way their limbs hung made me feel like if they turned around, their elbows would bend the wrong direction. I blinked, just once, and they were gone. No footsteps, no crack of branches, no rustle through the brush, nothing. I stood there for maybe half a minute, heart climbing up into my throat, waiting for some kind of noise. When nothing came, I walked calmly, too calmly back to the truck and drove to the next stop. That church was never supposed to be on our route. Everyone at the office said it hadn't held services in at least 20 years, maybe more. But there it was, listed on the system like it was just another customer. Full billing address. Meter location, basement entry, east side. It didn't look like any church I'd seen. The whole thing looked sunken, like it was being slowly swallowed by the ground. The stone foundation had deep cracks running through it. The bell tower leaned slightly forward, like it was bowing its head. The big front doors were chained together with a heavy padlock that looked older than I was. But on the east side, tucked behind overgrown brush, there was a smaller door with a busted latch. No lock. I opened it and stepped into the basement. It was cold in there, immediately. The kind of cold that doesn't make sense. Outside, it was high summer, maybe 80, 85. But inside that little basement space, it felt like a meat locker. I could see my breath puffing in front of me. I ducked under a beam and found the meter right where it was supposed to be, bolted to the far wall. An old analog one. The kind with the spinning dials and faded numbers behind a scratched-up faceplate. I leaned down to read it, and that's when I heard footsteps. Above me. Slow, uneven, dragging footsteps. Not the kind you'd mistake for the building settling. These were deliberate. One step landed hard. The other scraped, like something heavy being pulled along the wood floor. I stayed frozen, listening. They kept going back and forth. No voice. No other movement. Just those steps pacing. I didn't stay long after that. I backed out of the basement, left the side door open behind me, and walked straight to the truck. But something stopped me again. In the gravel driveway were footprints, dozens of them. Bare. Human. Human. Some looked small, some larger, but all headed in one direction, toward the church, and the gravel was dry. Nothing else was wet. But the footprints were dark, like whatever made them had just stepped out of water. No tire tracks, no sign of anyone else. Just those prints. I drove away, fast but steady, trying to stay rational about it. Told myself it was weird but not dangerous. that maybe I was just tired. I didn't tell anyone at first. The next morning, I got called in by my supervisor. He had my report up on the screen. He asked why I submitted a photo from the wrong property. I told him I hadn't. He showed me the image. It was of a meter, sure, but not the one I'd seen. This one was smashed. The casing was cracked open, numbers almost unreadable. And it was backwards, like the picture had been mirrored before being uploaded. He thought it was a joke. It wasn't. That weekend, I convinced my friend Maya to come back with me. She liked creepy stuff, figured it'd be a fun little adventure. We brought a flashlight, her old camera, and a handheld radio she still had from a paranormal tour in college. Everything was quiet until we reached the church. The chain on the front doors was broken. Not worn or rusted out, snapped clean, like someone had taken bolt cutters to it. Inside, it was empty. No pews. No cross. No signs it had ever been a place of worship. Just a large stone slab in the middle of the room and these deep scratches in the floorboards, like something heavy had been dragged back and forth over and over. The walls were stained. Black lines ran from the ceiling to the floor like something had dripped or bled down, dried in long streaks. The place smelled like rust and damp wood. Then we saw it. A door in the far corner. Narrow, wooden, almost hidden behind some collapsed paneling. We hadn't noticed it before. When I opened it, there was a stone staircase going down. Not like the basement I'd been in. These steps were different, older, carved from rough stone, and descending into complete blackness. We didn't go down. We stood there, listening, but there was only silence. I left a message for my supervisor asking to remove the site from the rotation. Never heard back. The next week, Andy New Guy real quiet got that route. He lasted 2 days. Walked into the office on Thursday morning, dropped his ID badge on the desk, and left without saying a word. Never came back. A few months later, I drove by again, just to see. The church was gone. Not destroyed. Not destroyed. Not burned down. Just gone. The lot was flat, covered in brittle grass, surrounded by trees that looked half dead even though it was early fall. No rubble, no foundation, not even a path leading up to where the doors used to be. I stopped at the gas station down the road and asked the clerk, Mason, a guy I'd talked to a dozen times before, if he remembered the church at the end of Buckner Ridge. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Ain't never been a church up that way." I didn't ask again. That winter, I requested a new route. Moved closer to the main roads. Took shifts where I'd always be around people.